In 1967, Jordan faced a devastating defeat in the Six-Day War, losing the West Bank and East Jerusalem. As King Hussein struggled to rebuild, a new challenge emerged within his own borders: the rise of Palestinian Fedayeen fighters who established an armed stronghold within Jordan, defying his rule and creating a state within a state. Arab solidarity with the Palestinian movement was at an all-time high, with countries like Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Libya openly supporting Palestinian resistance groups operating within Jordan. This overwhelming regional support made it nearly impossible for King Hussein to take decisive action against the Fedayeen, even as he saw his own authority eroding and Jordan's sovereignty slipping away. Tensions finally escalated to Black September, when the Jordanian military launched a brutal crackdown on Palestinian resistance groups. In this video, we explore how King Hussein navigated these formidable challenges, the brutal battles that followed, and how his decisive actions reshaped Jordan and the Middle East. Following the loss of the West Bank and East Jerusalem in the 1967 Six-Day War, over 300,000 refugees poured across the Jordan River into newly established camps around Amman and other cities. With this influx, Jordan became a base for the Fedayeen, guerrilla fighters committed to resisting Israel. They entrenched themselves in Jordan, particularly in the Wehdat and Al-Hussein refugee camps, which soon became known as independent republics. The Fedayeen operated as an armed state within Jordan, controlling large parts of Amman and disregarding Hussein's authority. Under Yasser Arafat, the Palestine Liberation Organization intensified guerrilla attacks against Israel from Jordanian soil, making the border town of Karameh their headquarters. However, the PLO struggled to maintain control over the various Fedayeen factions, which frequently split, merged, and competed for recruits by adopting increasingly radical positions and escalating attacks from within Jordan. On March 18, 1968, a mine detonated near an Israeli school bus in the Arava region, killing 2 adults and injuring 10 children. In response, on March 21st, the Israel Defense Forces launched a large-scale assault on Karameh. Although the PLO suffered heavy losses, around 200 killed and 150 captured, the battle significantly boosted their standing in the Arab world, raising Palestinian morale and elevating the group's reputation across the region. These ongoing attacks not only brought Jordan closer to conflict with Israel, but also further emboldened the Palestinian resistance, making it increasingly difficult for Hussein to rein in their influence. The Fedayeen were fighting on 2 fronts, waging war against Israel while also challenging the Jordanian state. In one instance, a Fedayeen group called Al-Nasser clashed with Jordanian police, prompting the Jordanian army to intervene. To contain their influence, Hussein reached a 7-point agreement with Palestinian organizations, banning public displays of weapons, prohibiting roadblocks, preventing ammunition storage in civilian areas, and requiring permits for demonstrations. However, the Fedayeen did not honor the agreement. Without a central authority, the various factions continued to consolidate power independently, encroaching on Jordanian state authority by setting up checkpoints and collecting taxes. As the Fedayeen increasingly acted autonomously, the Jordanian army began pressuring Hussein to take action, as the Palestinian presence within Jordan was beginning to overshadow the authority of the state. Yet taking action against the Palestinians was anything but straightforward. Using force to expel the Fedayeen risked alienating Jordan's Palestinian population and provoking outrage across the Arab world. Hussein's options were limited, as Libya, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait not only provided Jordan with financial aid, but also openly supported the Fedayeen. Since the 1967 Six-Day War, the Arab world had stood united, and any action against the Palestinian Fedayeen could be seen as aiding Israel, carrying the risk of severe diplomatic repercussions and isolation for Jordan. Amid these rising tensions, Hussein traveled to the United States to meet with President Nixon, seeking American support to pressure Israel into complying with UN Security Council Resolution 242, which called for the return of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Hussein believed that regaining these territories would help restrain the growing power of armed Palestinian groups that were steadily undermining his authority. However, his hopes were dashed when it became clear that Israel had no intention of returning the occupied lands. Hussein returned to Jordan to find the situation even more precarious as the Palestinians grew increasingly suspicious of his diplomacy, fearing it signaled an end to Jordan's role as a sanctuary for those resisting Israel. By 1970, various factions in the Fedayeen began openly challenging the legitimacy of the Hashemite monarchy, calling for its overthrow and the establishment of a revolutionary regime. These groups condemned Hussein as a puppet of Western imperialism, a reactionary and a Zionist tool. In February of that year, King Hussein met with Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser in Cairo. Nasser agreed to support Hussein's tougher stance against the Fedayeen and pledged to pressure them into ceasing their attempts to destabilize his regime. Returning to Jordan with renewed resolve, King Hussein issued a 10-point edict to curb Palestinian militant activities, but when the Fedayeen reacted violently, he was forced to withdraw the restrictions and even dismiss his interior minister, Muhammad al-Kailani, whom they viewed as hostile. This forced concession revealed to Hussein the extent to which his authority had been compromised by accommodating the Palestinian factions. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, he quietly began laying the groundwork to remove the Palestinian Fedayeen and reassert control over his country, by force if necessary. King Hussein saw that his only potential allies against the Fedayeen were the United States and Israel, yet seeking their support could fuel the Fedayeen's propaganda against him. On February 17, 1970, the American embassy in Tel Aviv relayed 3 questions from Hussein to Israel, asking how Israel would respond if Jordan confronted the Fedayeen. Israel replied positively to King Hussein and committed that they would not take advantage if Jordan withdrew its troops from the borders for a potential confrontation. The Jordanian army had partially recovered from the Six-Day War, aided by Pakistani military advisors who helped reorganize and train the forces, including a young officer named Zia-ul-Haq, who would later become Pakistan's army chief and president. Although Hussein was preparing the military for a possible confrontation, he still hoped to avoid outright conflict. For the next 18 months, Hussein made repeated efforts to avert a civil war. He sought a peaceful resolution, hoping to avoid the diplomatic isolation that would come with a war with the Palestinians. Endless negotiations with Yasser Arafat ensued, as they attempted to establish a settlement both sides could accept. This prolonged indecision frustrated the Jordanian army, which was eager to restore order on its own terms. Complicating matters, Iraq and Syria each backed their own Fedayeen factions. Hussein knew that Iraq had a sizable force positioned nearby, an air force that significantly outmatched the Royal Jordanian Air Force, and strong ties with the Fedayeen, potentially shifting the balance of power against him in a conflict. The Jordanian army numbered around 65,000 troops, but many of these soldiers were Palestinians, whose loyalty would be uncertain in an all-out war. A premature strike against the Palestinians could have catastrophic consequences, potentially provoking military intervention from Iraq and Syria, defections within his own ranks, and a violent end to his reign. On July 24, 1970, President Nasser of Egypt accepted a US-brokered ceasefire to the war of attrition along the Suez Canal with Israel, which King Hussein also backed. Palestinians condemned the truce, accusing Hussein of betraying their cause, and tensions mounted as their desperation grew. The Fedayeen, who had openly called for revolution, intensified their rhetoric with assassination attempts against King Hussein, each sparking fresh clashes between Palestinian forces and the Jordanian army. On September 1, 1970, as Hussein drove to the airport to see his daughter, Princess Alia, an attempt on his life, claimed by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, ignited yet another wave of violence. The situation reached a breaking point in September 1970 when the Fedayeen hijacked 4 airliners, forcing the world to take notice of the escalating crisis. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a hardline Fedayeen group, took a drastic step by hijacking 4 commercial jetliners. 3 were diverted to Dawson's Field, a remote airstrip in Jordan, where they were evacuated and then dramatically blown up before an international audience. While some hostages were released, 54 remained captive, as the PFLP demanded the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel, Switzerland, Britain and Germany. This audacious act gave King Hussein the opportunity to strike back at the Fedayeen and, as he later put it, recapture his country. The scale of the hijackings crossed a line, making it difficult for Arab states to openly support such extreme actions. The 60th Armored Brigade launched an assault on the Fedayeen headquarters in Amman's refugee camps. The violence was devastating. Up to 15,000 Palestinian militants and civilians were killed, and large sections of Palestinian towns and refugee camps, where the PLO had stockpiled weapons, were leveled. The PLO's leadership was shattered, and between 50,000 and 100,000 Palestinians were left homeless. With tanks leading the way, the army gained the upper hand and isolated the Fedayeen in Irbid and a few other northern towns. President Nasser played a key role in ending the civil war, bringing Hussein and Arafat to Cairo on September 26th to negotiate a ceasefire. He witnessed its signing the following day, but died of a heart attack soon after. The ceasefire solidified Hussein's gains, while Nasser's involvement helped prevent Jordan's isolation in an Arab world largely sympathetic to the Fedayeen and critical of Jordan's military response. Over the following months, Hussein systematically expelled the Fedayeen from Jordan. In October 1970, he appointed his trusted advisor, Wasfi Tal, as prime minister. Tal relentlessly pursued the remaining fighters, driving them into the corner of Ajloun before finally expelling them in July 1971. After the conflict, Tal's government launched a sweeping purge of Jordan's bureaucracy and military, removing officials sympathetic to the Palestinian resistance. King Hussein later described the removal of the Fedayeen to the US ambassador as a cancer operation, a costly but necessary purge. The civil war transformed Hussein, leaving him with renewed resolve and acceptance that the West Bank was likely lost for good. Ultimately, he dismantled the Palestinian state within Jordan and reasserted his control over the country. The Palestinians vowed revenge, forming the Black September organization, which embarked on a violent campaign that began with the assassination of Jordanian Prime Minister Wasfi Tal on November 28, 1971, in Cairo. This spree continued with the infamous Munich massacre in 1972, where 11 Israeli athletes and officials were kidnapped and killed during the Summer Olympics. In response, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir launched Operation Wrath of God, deploying an international Mossad hit squad to track down and assassinate the militants involved. Black September permanently displaced the Palestinian Fedayeen from Jordan, forcing its fighters to regroup in southern Lebanon. In the years that followed, Iran would adopt the Palestinian cause to build up Hezbollah, a group that would grow to operate as a state within a state, and eventually overshadow Lebanon's government. While Black September's actions are condemned by Palestinians as a brutal massacre, for King Hussein, they marked the moment he decisively restored his rule over Jordan. Were the king's actions against the Palestinian resistance justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I've been your host, Albert. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Until next time.